Real estate is a big business with a lot to know. There are so many moving parts, skill sets, knowledge bases, and experience required to grow a real estate business. And therefore, oftentimes people look to partnerships. Real estate is littered with partnerships. In today's episode, we discuss what makes a good partnership, what makes a bad partnership, the things to consider from time, capital, skill set. They're just the obvious things people talk about when considering a business partner. However, there is so much more to consider. In today's episode, we get into what makes successful business partners last over the long term. It's the long term that matters. So there is very, very important and useful content here today. We hope you enjoy it and subscribe if you value this content. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
15, 20 years from now, you are living your best life. You are not bound by the chains of a W-2 income. You're traveling, watching your children grow, being present in their lives. You're fulfilling all of your dreams and ambitions. Burn the Boats is a powerful metaphor for making positive changes in life and moving forward despite challenges. It means creating a new reality by breaking free from old habits, people, and tools that hold you back. Burning your boats is when you realize your worth, your value, and you make the choice to create change. Clark and David are successful real estate investors who understand the importance of wealth creation and breaking free of financial anxiety. They believe that anyone can achieve this by thinking differently, learning new skills, and saying no to things that do not align with your goals. This podcast highlights pivotal moments and milestones in life that can set you on a new path towards realizing your full potential. Make the choice to join Clark and David and their guests as they share their own experiences and what they have learned to do and not to do in real estate investing, and share how you too can start your journey in creating meaningful wealth and live the life you deserve.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Burn Your Boats podcast. Today, we're going to do an episode that's dear to my heart. It's something I have a lot of experience with. I've done it over the years. And I think it's one of the most important things that we can talk about as we, discuss real estate in general. And that's the subject of partnerships. This is a big business with a lot of different angles to it, a lot of different skill sets, and there are just so many different versions of real estate. And with that being said, we're talking about partnerships. Welcome to my partner here, Clark Lunt. How are you doing?
David, I'm doing great. Thank you for that cool introduction. I definitely know that talking about partnerships and what needs to be the seeds that you plant to make a successful partnership is kind of what we're going to be going over today. So let's get into it. Let's jump right into it.
Let's do that. Clark, I remember, just to give the listeners a little bit of an insight here. I remember when I met you first. You were wholesaling. I bought a couple of deals from you. Then we got together, we partnered on a couple of deals, and then we wholesaled again and again and again. And in that, I saw a lot of things go right, and I saw a lot of things go wrong. And it's how you handled yourself. The level of honesty and integrity that you handled yourself with led me to reach out to you when I was in need of a new business partner just after COVID, when my previous business partner decided to retire. I was out there in the world. I needed a certain level of skilled partner. And I reached out to you, and I reached out to you because you met so much of the criteria that we're going to discuss here today. And it's an absolute honor to be a business partner with you based on what we're about to talk about. But when we discussed it, when we sat down and said, Clark, were you interested in partnering up with me? I'm going to say we spent months dealing with what we're about to talk about today. Before we agreed to partner, we had these conversations for definitely 2 to 3 months of detailed hitting on these topics over and over and over again. So without further ado, Clark, let's let the people in. Let's talk to people about what happens when two experienced, reasonably successful people get together and have a partnership. Because if we can help you, we came together having learned an awful lot in this business. If you're starting out or you're thinking about getting into a partnership with somebody else, listen to today's podcast carefully, because we think we can help you avoid what I have seen so many partnerships fail catastrophically. In fact, very few businesses get through the full life cycle of a partnership. Would you agree with that?
100% for sure. And I think that to really take it, if you're going to kind of put a hierarchy of like, okay, I'm getting into a partnership, what's the most important thing that there needs to be within a good quality partnership? And I think if you ask 10 people, you probably get 10 different answers. I think as me and you have grown in our partnership and different partnerships we've had in the past, I think the first thing that floats to the top, without a doubt, David, has nothing to do with necessarily how good you are at a certain skill set, or that you have this Rolodex or this much cash in your back pocket or this much experience, right? That's all well and great, and that's all very important. But ultimately, the number one thing is trust. You have to be able to trust your partner to the 100 percentile, that they have your back and you have their back. Because if you're always looking over your shoulder and having to determine whether or not they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how good your Rolodex is, how good you are at running crews to be able to renovate a house properly. If I can't trust you, then it's a house of cards and it will crumble. How do you feel about that?
Clark, it's the number one thing. It's literally the only thing that matters. If somebody else lacks this, lacks that, lacks the other, we're going to go through pros and cons as this conversation develops. But if you don't trust somebody 100%, think about a marriage. A marriage is based on 100% trust. The concept that everything you do is done with the best outcome of the partnership involved. If you don't have that, just stop. If there's, because you cannot move forward without that. What is trust? Watching somebody do the right thing over and over again to clients, their integrity and their honesty. Listen to your business partner on the phone. Does he ever lie to clients, to his bank,
That's good,
to his wife, to his... If people tell lies at all, don't trust them, because they're going to tell you lies. If you see somebody and you're doing business with somebody, or a business partner, and that business partner tries to screw somebody over, right away that person cannot be trusted. And like these are things that are so very important, and it's why I trust you. I have seen you when we weren't business partners, when you were, I was a client of yours, buying properties from you, and I've seen you make mistakes, and I've seen how you responded to those mistakes. You could have responded throwing the letter of the contract at me, but you always responded with treating me with respect, treating me with integrity, and going with what the spirit of our agreement was, rather than just showing, oh, this is what the contract says. I have seen you, and integrity in this business often requires that you put your hand in your pocket to protect your integrity. Integrity is not words. Integrity in real estate is usually saying, you are right, I made a mistake, that was a $7,000 mistake, I'm going to fix that for you by paying that. Would you agree with that? That is... Go ahead.
It's kind of like walking the walk versus talking the talk. Saying, "Oh, I have integrity and I have this." Well, that's all well and great, but usually, you show your true colors when you have to take your checkbook out. You have to write out a nice fat check to someone, even if what's written down may not support that action, but in your heart, so you said it, the spirit of the deal, right? The spirit of the deal is like, whatever it says on there, you have the real world, and then you have, what's written on a contract. And just because it's written on a contract, that it may have gone a certain way to where, yeah, it's written on a contract, but the spirit of the deal says that if this happens, I'm going to stand behind it. And if you want to get into the fine print and go to page 14B, paragraph C, there's always loopholes. But if you like ruining relationships and not getting far in this world, then that the spirit of the deal says that I was going to do this and this didn't happen. And that means a lot of times you have to reach into your pocketbook.
Yeah, there's a lot of money rolls around in real estate, and that is the number one thing. If somebody points me to line 14, section A, addendum 2 of a
Yeah.
contract, over a $200 thing or a $10,000 thing, somebody does that to me, I will not trust that person anymore. So, number one, business partnerships, you've got to trust each other. You got to have love in your heart. You got to have integrity, and you have got to witness this person showing trust and showing integrity to other people before you ever get into business relationship with them. Because honestly, I have seen this ruin financial lives in the past, where two people, they build a business, they build it together, and then something happens, something slips with their trust, and they just go into, scorched earth, burn it down, dissolution of their business relationship. It happens in marriages as well. These things, if you don't, usually if somebody is trustworthy, they're honest, and there's integrity behind them, you can resolve most other issues, but in the absence of it, you can't move forward. You can't really move at any kind of great speed, without trust. And so don't ruin your financial life. Don't get into business with somebody you don't trust. And if you see somebody that's telling lies and all that kind of stuff, just you're not going to move very fast with that person anyhow. And it just wastes a massive amount of your time with legal headaches and anxiety, and it just strips all the fun out of being in business with somebody.
It does.
Being in business with somebody is supposed to be a journey. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, you when you have a partner or a partnership with one or more partners, it is, entrepreneurship is lonely, and you're kind of on this mountain by yourself. And when a lot of times when you have big decisions to make and it's just you, it is lonely as hell to be like, what do I do here? And to have a partner or a few partners to be able to really bounce ideas off of each other is massively helpful, just for your own mental health, to be like, I think I'm making the right decision. I think we are making it. We went through it. Everyone's going to look at it slightly different. I'm glass half full, so I'm always looking at why we should do it. You have kind of a more balanced approach where it's like, yeah, but what if this happens? More of a devil's advocate approach, and it's good because they kind of balance each other out. So that's so important to be able to do it, and it's just more fun. I think we've talked about this a lot. I'd rather win together. It's more fun that way. But also too, as I was listening to what you're saying, and let's say I'm listening to this and I want to get into a partnership, right? And I'm like, well, where do I go to say, are you trustworthy, David? You're never going to say, well, not really. I mean, I'm going to screw a lot of people over, but I won't screw you over, right? You're not ever going to hear that. It's not going to be that much in your face. And I will say that for us, the way that we got together is I initially just started selling you deals. So you were just essentially a client of mine. I would sell you a deal. You would pay me a fee for that, right? That's a very transactional relationship. That was kind of like being buddies, right? Like being friends. Then we're like, okay, how about we date, right? We're not married. And we actually went in together, and I would bring the deal, you would renovate it, and we would split the profits, right? So now we're doing more of a profit share, which it brings more trust. I have to trust you, right? I have to trust that you're not going to inflate the repairs so that you could pay yourself, right? And then I think as we grew, then we said, okay, now let's see if we have the same vision to actually get into more of a marriage, right? So in our situation, the partnership, it didn't happen overnight, right? We didn't meet each other and do a deal together and say, all right, let's get into bed together and get married, right? So, in a perfect world, you do kind of have that time to kind of test each other out a little bit and be like, I like this guy at first, but I saw some things down the road that didn't rear its ugly head. So in a perfect world, you would have that kind of time to grow organically and see the people's true character that doesn't always show up on day one.
That was a great answer, Clark. One of the things I would suggest is always having even 0.5% of give 0.5% equity away, or have some third party in any like if it's a partnership between two people or three people, just have somebody kind of independent who looks at your books. You've got your bookkeeper, you've got your accountant. Not a bad idea to just have somebody, just some oversight that's always there. And it could be a partner within the business. So it could be the partnership of three people, or partnership of four people, or just a partnership of two people. But always have somebody else just inside your deal, like inside your business, that that can look at your books, look at your bookkeeping, look at your accounts at the end of the year, and say, yeah, this all looks legit. This all not a bad idea. I've always had a third party in every business relationship that I've had that's just there, keeping an eye on things, making sure the trust is there, but just there, that all parties know that there is somebody who knows what they're talking about, looking at the income coming in and the money going out. And so, it brings me on to the next most important thing after trust is something that I've seen, and it's not discussed all that much, is what happens when you're successful? What happens when the band, has a number one hit? Let me give you an example. You get a band, and a garage band, and they're knocking around the country. They spend 5 years putting little demo tapes together, playing some Fleabag bars in the back of Beyonds, and they want to hit. They want to get famous. They want to get known. They want to get recognized. And so they put all of this super hard work in for years and years, and then they hit it. They make it big. How many bands do you know that implode right at that moment? Yeah. And why? And I have seen this in business. I use that as an analogy, right? But I've seen it in business so many times, Clark, that guys are working so hard together. They're busting their chops to get to success. Let's make $1 million together. Let's make $5 million together. And that's the agreement. And then they hit that $1 million. And, at that point, now there's real money involved. Now there's real stress involved. Now there's real growth involved. And so many times you have one partner in the analogy, could be the lead singer, who's just like, I don't like it. I'm too stressed out. And it can take, the lives of 3 or 4 other people out, just because Mr. Lead Singer doesn't like it anymore. And so I think when you're getting together with somebody, don't plan as your main goal is like, we'll make $1 million. Let's get into business. I would pay each other such and such a month, and we'll make $1 million. What happens when you make that $1 million? So don't plan that you will be successful. Plan what happens after you're successful. And I think because when money comes in, and when serious money comes in, that's when it might not be an argument. It's just a different vision of what you want to do now. Because I've been in 3 or 4 different relationships where, one person's goals were different than my goals, even though we met the original goals, which the bar was quite low. Was either just survive, or let's make 100 grand, or let's grow sales by 100% next year. But what happens when all partners start to become reasonably well off? What happens then, Clark? Tell me why you need an extra vision for what happens post success. Tell me why that's so important.
Well, it's such a good point, and no one ever talks about, David, what you just said. No one talks about. Everyone talks about how to become successful. What do you do to get to the top of the mountain, right? But then what do you do once you're on top of the mountain, looking around, right, and being like, okay, now what? And if you don't talk about that up front, and you don't handle that, then it's gonna fall apart on a house of cards. And I know that, like, I look back at my own personal life with my own marriage, right? Like, me and my ex-wife went in together wanting to be successful. We were business partners, so we were partners in life and we were partners in business. And we both wanted to be successful. We both wanted to work hard to get to a point where we felt like we were doing big things. But then we started to achieve some success, And once we got to that point, I think we didn't have the same idea of what we wanted to do next. Okay. And you notice I said ex wife, right? And there's a reason
I
for
did.
that. And that's because we both wanted to be successful. Maybe we wanted to get there a slightly different route, but ultimately she wanted her to be successful and our relationship to be successful and our businesses. And I feel like that they were. But then we kind of got to that next point to be like, well, do we go out and reinvest the money into the business to try and grow it and to
Yeah.
employees? Or do we go out and buy a boat, right? Or do we go out and go travel or do things that maybe aren't going to help build the business and actually you may take some chips off the table? And there's not a right or wrong answer. The only wrong answer is that you're not rowing the boat in the same direction. And I think that ultimately is what we found out. It was our problem is that she wanted to maybe zag left and I was zagging right, essentially. So if you don't have a good idea of once you make a certain amount of money or a certain amount of success, are you taking all the chips just off the table and just continuing to run the business as it is? Or are you wanting to grow it, which means you're going to have to delay your gratification a little bit, do some sacrifice, and reinvest that into the infrastructure or whatever is going to help grow that business? And if you don't even have that discussion, you're setting yourself up for failure.
It's a great expansion of the idea. You must have a post-success agreement. You
Yeah.
must have an agreement that, okay, when we get to, let's say the business is worth $1 million or $5 million, what do we do then? Because you might get one partner, as you say, that wants to distribute. You might get another partner who wants to invest for the future and grow it to a $20 million business. And one
Yep.
partner wants to distribute and take a boat. And so getting that agreement up front before you're successful, cannot stress to you how important that is, because it can have a really, really big and negative impact further down the road. You've got two people, they love each other, they trust each other, they've got a great business. Everything about this business and partnership is ideal, except for as time goes on, they have a slightly different vision of
Yeah.
how, do I want to keep deferring gratification? Or one partner might just want a different lifestyle. So let's talk about these things. Why would you partner in the first place? Just let's give us a quick list, Clark, of why you think getting into a business partnership, particularly in real estate where there's so many different types of skills required, from technical skills to marketing
Right.
skills to sales skills to negotiation skills to financial skills to contract skills, legal skills, banking and financial skills. There's so many different skill sets required. And that's why, particularly in real estate, there is a lot of business partnerships, because very few people carry all of those skills under their belt. And if you try and scale a business on your own without having partners in those seats, you just can't do all these things yourself. You'll be a
burn
very
out.
small business. Oh, you'll be a very
Yeah.
small business. So why
Yeah.
partnership? Can you give me a couple of examples why people get into partnerships in real estate in particular?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of a quick few bullet points because there's risk to any partnership, right? And so it's like, but there's a lot of upside to that. So what are some of the upsides? So, ultimately you hit on this. If I have a certain skill set, right, but I may not be as good in others, and you have that skill set, then we can kind of cross collaborate well. So I can kind of leverage your ability to your skill set, and then you can leverage my skill set, and we become much greater than the sum of our parts, right? We alluded to earlier, just camaraderie, being able to, me and you to have this podcast, right, is just fun,
Yeah,
right? To be able to talk about, laugh about stories, I mean, we've got so many crazy stories that we've seen over the last few years, and
a lot of
some
funny
we'll
ones.
share and some we probably won't share, right? Networks, right? Like all the people that now you're connecting me into those networks and vice versa. All the people that I've met through the years, I can bring you in, and then we can all sit down and figure out how we can help each other grow. You can I mean, there's obvious things like capital, right? You can just like you bring capital in, I bring capital in. Now we have more capital together as a group to be able to go out and buy more assets in
Yeah,
our case with real estate. You can leverage your networks, your capital. You can leverage different skill sets. So those are just a few of the reasons that are huge, because
yeah.
ultimately successful real estate groups and partnerships typically are going to be something that are going to grow much faster together than if you're just on your own.
But we could talk about the different skill sets people can bring to the table, and different skill sets, Clark, have a different value, right? And so
Right.
we're going to talk about what that value to those different skill sets are a little bit further on in the podcast. I really want we're going to talk about how to structure a business and how to structure equity in relation to the skill sets that you just outlined. But the area where we see a lot of anxiety and strife build up within partnerships are when people don't really agree up front about the elephant in the room is always money. Different people have different relationship. How
Yep.
much pay are we going to pay ourselves? Month one. So, the first year, you're going to pay yourself X because you're not bringing in any money. But year
Yep.
two, you're bringing in a little bit more, year three, and so on. So how much pay do you want to pay? Do you want to give each other, or distributions do you want to give each other? The big one. You really need to kind of talk about that and be on the same page with that. It's huge. Things like vacation pay. How much vacation do you want a year? I'm European. I want the summers off. I want 4 weeks off in the summer, and that's just a non-negotiable to me. But to somebody else, that could be outrageous,
Right.
unacceptable, and so you have to get that right up front. Christmas time, I'm taking 2 weeks off at Christmas time. So vacation time, that's huge, right? Expenses. So in real estate as well, there's a lot of travel. There's a lot of, and so for some people, this is all the money section. There are some people, Clark, that they're going to go away. They're going to blow a lot of the company's money and stays at the Ritz, eating in Burns, go to the most expensive steakhouse they can find, drinking the most expensive cocktails on the business card. I
Yep.
found that to be, you need to, right up front, you need to have a discussion, say, okay, when we're traveling, we're going to either have an allowance or we're going to have some type of acceptable spend. Certainly in the first, 5 or 10 years of a business, you need to have that. So
Right.
if somebody just going out and being outrageous, you need to pull that in on day one and say, look, this is what acceptable behavior is.
Yep.
We mentioned distributions a lot. There's a lot of time where a company needs, like on your business tax returns, you might see that the profit of the business was $1 million this year, but you don't have $1 million sitting in your bank account, yet you're paying tax on $1 million. And so some people at that point in time will want to rip all the money out of business or make the business smaller at that point in time. So getting upfront about distributions and how to structure distributions and how to structure tax payments. Because if you're in a business partnership and an LLC, you're dependent on the equity level. You're both responsible for paying taxes. So if one partner wants to reinvest everything and the other partner wants to put some money aside, let's say for taxes and distributions, that's a very different outlook, because that tax time will come along and then you might have to liquidate things in a fire sale to make that happen. So distributions and reinvesting and just a general day-to-day concept of what are we going to do with the cash flow within the business, super important that you talk about that before you get started. And equally important is the equity of the business. Day one, week one, everybody's equal, right?
Yep.
No, that's not right,
Yeah.
because different people are bringing different things. So
Yeah.
the equity of the business, you've got 100% of the business at the moment on day one, the business is worth nothing, right? So it's very easy to give 50% or 60% or 30%,
Right.
but you have to ask yourself, what are you bringing to the table? Are you both bringing exactly the same level of value to the table? And so that would,
Never.
how often
Yeah.
have you seen businesses just, just two partners, they go 50-50? How many times do you see that?
Usually it's there's a fair amount of people that'll go 50-50 on it. It's like, hey, let's team up. You put in half, I put in half, and you do your piece, and I'll do my piece, and it'll all be successful.
How often do you see, when you see business partnerships, how often do you see partnerships that really in the real world look like, they're both pulling at exactly the same speed. They're both bringing the same equity. They're both bringing the same skills. There's usually one partner that's bringing a little bit more or a lot more than the other, and that can lead to disaster. So when you're setting out your equity, sitting down on day one, business isn't worth anything, Let's talk about some things that you should talk about. Number one, as far as I'm concerned, the elephant in the room, and the one I've seen, blow up more relationships than not, is one person comes to the table with the money, with the capital,
Yep.
and they believe that capital is an equal equity stake as somebody who's bringing all of the skills and all of the value to the business. Capital has a cost. It's usually a set cost. You go to a bank and get capital at 8%. You could go to a hard money lender and you get capital at 10%. And so if you measure the amount of business that you do a year, say, well, how much was the cost of capital this year? You might find it was like, $312,000 of interest payments and origination fees and whatnot. That's the only value capital has. How many business partnerships have you seen in real estate, Clark, that one guy brought the money and the other guy brought the deal, the equity, the contractors, the
Everything.
dispo, everything else, and they split the profits 50-50? How many times have you seen that?
It really happens on newer investors where it's like they don't have the money and they view the capital as so important, because it's true, without capital you're not, I don't care how good of a deal, you're not going to buy anything if you don't have any capital. So it's viewed as such a high valuable thing. And then once you get into it and you start learning, you're like, wait a second, this capital is not worth 50% or 40%. It's actually worth 10%, annualized over the year. And so you'll see a lot of newer investors, whether they're getting into buying a business or buying real estate, is that they may do one or two deals, but they quickly, if they have any success at all, right, within that first deal or two, they're like, well, wait a second, I can go out and find that capital way cheaper, and then I can take a much bigger piece of the pie. And that's what I see all the time.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people get together 50-50. They'll do it like twice, maybe three times.
Max.
And then the operator is like, no, your money's not that expensive. So learn this. If you take nothing away from this podcast, capital is easy to replace. A meaningful, skilled business partner is impossible to replace. Would you agree with that? Or certainly very, very difficult to replace. Capital is easy.
It's a much more valuable.
Yeah, skilled, trustworthy business partnerships. Never, ever, ever base them purely on capital. I'm going to give you some examples of how when you're sitting down on day one and you talk about how to split up equity, right? There is time. Like, let's say one person is going to dedicate 100% of their time to this project, and the other person is working 2 jobs and got like 5 kids and got commitments left and right. Does the time aspect of like one person is prepared to do like an hour a week and the other person is prepared to do 128 hours a week? It's being a little bit facetious, but like time, discuss that, because more time from a skilled operator is worth its weight in gold in terms of equity, right? You might have somebody like me where I've got larger vacation expectations. I'm not selling my soul out, to get into a business partnership. And so time is very important to me. I'll give this amount of time, but not that amount of time. I've got 3 young kids. I have other small businesses that I run. I've got my life to lead. And so time is very important to me. So I'm not going to, a lot of business relationships can fall apart because my expectation is that I'm going to give 60 hours a week. But Clark's expectation is that he's going to give 20 hours a week. Well, if that's the case, well, then I deserve more equity. Would you agree with that, Clark?
You do. 100%. Absolutely.
Okay. What about business concept? What about just somebody who comes up with the idea? I think we should do this, I think we should do that, and this is how we should do it. It's like the business concept and creativity. If somebody is coming up with the concepts and the creative backdrop to the piece of business, that's worth equity, right? That's worth more than capital as far as I'm concerned.
It's almost, it's that entrepreneurial spirit of coming up. It's like the visionary, right? And it's the person that comes up with the ideas. They build, they take something potentially from nothing, right? And they're like, we've been working on this, but I see this new opportunity or this new idea that we can do. And this is why there's such gray areas, right? Because it's hard to quantify, well, what does it work to come up with a new idea? Because it may not work or it may work, right? So ultimately, the visionary aspect of this is certainly worth something, because at the end of the day, you could have access to the capital, you could have a great integrator that's running a business, but if you have no forward thinking, forward looking into being able to keep up with it, just like as we're seeing with the economy we've been in over the last few years, is that it's been a roller coaster, right? And it's like rates are up, they're down, there's demand, there's this, there's that. And it's like, if you're not constantly making sure that you're keeping up with and pivoting in the right direction, you will go out of business very quickly. And if you decided in 2023 that all you wanted to do is just buy investment properties and sell them to investors, and they were going to have all this amazing cash flow, you would be completely broke right now. So it's like, you always have to be looking ahead to make sure that your business is not fighting the tide as your favorite thing.
Yeah, that's right. I cannot stress that enough. And it's a really, really, really valid point, is that if somebody has got a creative nature and they can see the risks, they can see the pitfalls, they can see the twists and turns in front, and they're very, very good at navigating those, I think that in itself is worth equity.
So, David, what are some other things that are good examples for equity? Because again, like, this is such an important topic, because if you sit down and you're having this discussion with a potential partner or partners, right? And everyone's going to be different situations, right? There may be the person with 1 or 2 jobs, right? So they can just kind of give some money and a little bit of consulting. Well, what is that worth? Then you got the guy that's putting his blood, sweat, and tears. He's waking up at 6 in the morning so that he can hit the ground running at 8 o'clock to work till 7 at night. And I think that's a struggle that a lot of people are going to have now and in the future with talking with partners. But I can tell you right now, there's not a perfect answer, a perfect percentage that you're going to give to the partner for coming up with creative ideas, right? However, I do know that if you don't address that in the beginning, if you don't address that in those initial discussions to make sure that the vision is the same, then you're just going to be standing on a house of cards, and eventually you're going to be. A failure will be inevitable. It just depends on how soon it'll come.
I totally agree. Like, we were talking about, visionary and then integrators. So examples of integrators, let's say I have money, I'm great at talking to people, I'm great at sales, but I lack marketing skills completely. All right, I have no business contacts. That's a huge one. So somebody comes to the table and they've just got a big Rolodex of everybody. And if somebody else comes to the table and, they don't. That in itself, when you're dividing equity, these are the things you need to talk about. Like, I have deep well of marketing experience. I scaled a company from here to here. I scaled a social media, platform from, A to B. Then another thing, experience in the field. If somebody's been out there and they've done 800 renovations, that's a huge skill set that deserves equity. It just deserves equity. It's just something that you can really scale with somebody who's done that level of business before. And then tenacity. Like, if you see somebody, and particularly in a sales role, and they've been like door to door knocking, like they're just out there and they're prepared that shame is not something that they deal with, and they're knocking doors in a neighborhood. Every rundown house in a neighborhood, you see a guy, and that hunger is there. What value do you put on that? So overall, when you're splitting up equity, try not to do 50-50. Try to sit down and have an honest conversation with, what are your skills? What do you find heavy? What do you find light? What do you love to do all day? What do you hate doing? What is it you absolutely hate doing? And map all this out. And just say, well, how much time do you want to invest? How much time do you want to invest? How much capital do you have? And try and put all of this into a pot right up front, because that way you can really start to scale a business up front. Now, we talked about partnership agreements. Get all of this into a partnership agreement. Clark, the reason for a partnership agreement is just, it's a roadmap. It's an upfront disclosure. After you've negotiated all these things and you've talked about these things, you say, look, here's what I expect of you. And in return, you get 35% or 50% or 85% of this business. And here's what here's what you expect from me. And so it's just a roadmap. Getting
Yep.
a partnership agreement written down creates a roadmap, and it creates a dissolution, path
Yep.
for
Yep.
if there's any kind of egregious breakdown, in these agreements. So always make sure you have an exit strategy, lined up, because here's the thing. We talked about this earlier, not sharing the same vision. What happens is two people, they come to an exit strategy, and one person wants to grow the business from a $10 million business to $1 million, or to a $100 million business, and the other person does not. At that point in time, you either exit or you scale. Would you agree with
Yep.
that? All right.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
And I've seen this more often than not, changes a personal partner. Something could happen in their personal lives. It's so this is when it comes up. Somebody gets married, somebody gets remarried, you know, all of a sudden they have different priorities. Their priorities 5 years ago or 7 years ago when you guys got into business might be one thing, but their
Right.
priorities now, once they have children, that's a big
Yep.
one. Once people have kids, their priorities change. And so, Clark, what do you think, negative and positive are what, what will, from an exit strategy point of view, what do you think is a healthy exit strategy method? And what are like egregious examples of just items and behaviors that cause an exit strategy right now? Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you have to write it down, and the whole goal of having it in very clear print is that it strips out a lot of emotion. So if something's not happening, right, you're in this partnership, and one of the partners is not doing what they agreed to that was written down. It's easy to be like, hey, John, you agreed to put in $50,000 in this business, and you only put in 25, right? How's John going to argue that? It makes it a more adult conversation, and it tends to take out a lot of the emotion. Hey, John, you wrote here that you're going to spend 30 hours a week in marketing, give or take. Would you agree you spend less than 5? And that in itself is like, look, at the end of the day, it's just not what you signed up for something, and you haven't really come through on that, and that's okay. So we'll point to our exit that we agreed to that says, if one's gonna buy out the other, here is the exact thing. Hey, we're gonna give such a value to these assets, and whatever that looks like. It takes out the emotion, and the more you can take the emotion out of something, the more that you're one adult speaking to another adult, and it makes it so much easier. I am in a bad partnership right now that we just did one deal together, and I learned so much from this. And the challenge that we've had as to why we actually had to go through mediation and attorneys and all that thing is that ultimately we didn't have it written down perfectly what was required. And then also too is that he's very, very emotional, and he wants to just win at any cost. And because we didn't write it down very, very clearly, we're in court, attorneys, mediation, Zoom calls. It's a mess, right? And it's all because our upfront conversations that we had initially. We never did. If I would have watched this episode 3 years ago, I may have a full head of hair right now, David. And I know you don't believe me, but I think I've lost a lot of hair and had a lot of stress through this. So if just writing those things down, and I think writing down things as to why the partnership would go bad, like if you were to do something illegal, if you were to do something that was counterintuitive to the betterment of the partnership, and if you could cite that thing that was done, then it immediately you can move to say, hey, listen, partner, you did this, which is in clear violation of our partnership agreement. We're going to have to dissolve this partnership based on what you did. And it's hard for them to argue that if you put it clearly in writing. And I know it sounds crazy to think, oh, well, I'm going to put things like illegal things that you should do. But it happened to me, and it's happening to me right now.
Yeah, it is just so important that you set out these goals, you set out these exit strategies, you set out behaviors that would, lead to a dissolution. So it's just all up front. Business partnerships are amazing. They are. I have been every business I've ever done. I've done them with a or with a business partner. I've enjoyed business partnerships, but every single time I'll spend a long time, if you can, dating. You don't always have to get into a full marriage right off the bat. A lot of times it's pretty good if you guys can, figure out, some skills in one area and skills in another area that you can both work to. And then you both maybe have your own LLCs, and then, work together for a year, see if you can create some synergy between your LLCs,
Right.
and then form into a, a partnership at that point in time. But definitely treat partnerships with kitten gloves. They can ruin your life or they can enhance your life. A
Yep.
good business partnership, my goodness, you can really, really, really scale yourself with skills that you don't have. It's never get into never get into a relationship or a partnership relationship with somebody with exactly the same skills as you, just because you're
Yep.
friends. That's a big one. As we go out the door here, we're talking about it. I think friends are great, but don't get into business because you're friends with somebody. Get into business because they have opposing skills than you. They have things that you cannot do. And in hindsight, just the very simple stuff. Set out a partnership agreement. Never get into business with somebody you cannot trust. Have an exit strategy, and make sure that you have a post-success strategy. That's so important.
I love that one. Yeah. And I think I'll leave you, I'll kind of end it on this one with social media. It's so much easier now to connect, right? We can connect with people all over the world, and it's easier to connect with like minds. You're like, hey, I want to do this. Who's thought about this kind of thing? And it's easy to connect and be like, hey, you sound like you have a similar goal that I have. Let's do it together, right? If you look at it from a standpoint of, because now if you're going in together, potentially you could be sharing bank accounts, you could be sharing things that are very intimate things, right? Would you just meet a girl on day one and be like, hey, this was a fun date. Let's just share a bank account. You know what? Let's just get a credit card while we're at it too. Like, you would never do that, right? So you need to look at a potential business relationship just like you would dating a girl or a guy or another person and getting into a marriage, right? Where you're going to be sharing a lot of intimate things, right? You're not going to meet someone on a first date and be like, hey, let's get married and let's go buy a house together tomorrow, right? So that should be no different when you're getting in business with another partner on any type of different business or real estate or anything like that. So just keep that mindset when you're talking about the next partner that you want to do a deal with.
That's invaluable. Yeah, I see, Pete, particularly in our business, it's very collaborative.
It is.
I have learned over the last 15 years in real estate to try and be a little bit more transactional, in that I'll buy that deal from you or I'll do this. A lot of people have come to me over the years and say, hey, let's partner on this deal and that deal. And as I've gotten older, I just don't do them. I'm way more transactional. I'm like, yeah, no, I'll buy it from you, or I'll sell it to you, or I'll give you this fee for it. In terms of business relationships and business partnerships, it's much bigger reasons that I'll get into a partnership, and that would be to grow a portfolio. Grow something bigger.
Yeah.
That we share the same vision on. But you do not need to get into a partnership to do a deal. You can do that transactionally.
That's it. I love it. I think, David, that's probably a good stopping
And with
point.
that being said,
Yeah. Yeah, ultimately, I hope that you took a lot away from this episode. I know that there's so many opportunities to get in business with other partners, but you got to have the difficult discussions up front. There's going to be a difficult discussion either way. It's a lot easier to have it before you get into a partnership than 3 years down the road when you're talking through attorneys, and it'll be a lot cheaper. So please take some of these things that we put together, and they're just things that we've experienced ourselves through our own mistakes and things that have gone well. And I appreciate you listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time, David.
Thank you. This was an invaluable podcast. I hope people take away even a nugget.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app. and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.